Hey, Azure.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
It's a hot one today.
Is it?
Yeah, it is here.
I mean, it probably is here. I just haven't been outside.
I take a walk at lunchtime and I was like, I'm not doing my hair today because it's going to look terrible. It's a bun day.
I spoke to her Oops. All right, we'll just give everyone a little bit to sign on. Hi, Katie.
Hey there, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Well, we're just going to give everyone like another, maybe a minute or so to join. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. So, hey everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. I hope you all had a good Labor Day weekend. I know it's been a bit since we've done a social hour, and I can't believe it's already September. It's just crazy how quickly the summer flew by. As always, just as a reminder, we encourage this to be like an open forum, so don't be shy. The calls where we have people asking questions or updating us on what they're doing are always the most helpful, and we get the most benefit out of them. So we really love when you guys speak up. And I'll be sure to pause and ask the group if they have any questions during our little hour today. And we'll be monitoring and reading the chat. So if you're too shy or can't find a moment to jump in, feel free to type in any questions or things in there, and we'll be sure to see them and call them out. So I'm excited to get started today. Our guest was actually a guest on our podcast, Two Chicks, Three Seats, earlier this year, and she had so many wonderful insights that we wanted to give you guys a chance to hear from her on Social Hour. So Katie, do you want to give everyone a little bit of information about your background in interior design and how you've been applying it to the hospitality industry, and maybe a little bit about what you've been doing during COVID?
Yeah. Hey guys. So again, my name is Katie Perkins. If you listen to the podcast, this is probably going to be a little bit of a refresh, but so I've been in interior design and architecture for the past 12 years. I've been in the hospitality industry from the start. So I grew up working in the industry. So I was a host, a server, I did catering, I did the whole spiel. And I went into design from that and have been doing primarily restaurant design since then. I've done a little bit of innovation as well around food and things like that, but primarily independent restaurants, some corporate work with Starbucks, WeWork, things like that. And yeah, so I love the industry. I think it's probably one of the most amazing industries there is. It's super collaborative, which is my favorite part of it. And I always say that the reason that I'm in the design aspect of it is that like I would never be able to be actually cooking or anything like that, even though I absolutely love what everybody else can do. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so with COVID, I mean, the biggest thing has been in February, end of February, I actually went on maternity leave and had as my second child. And so I came into this with the whole world turned upside down, which was crazy. So being in the hospitality world from a design perspective has definitely been an interesting sort of transition, if you will, with COVID going on. I started we did a lot less of like actual new restaurants. Obviously, we started doing a lot more sort of like quick hits with how do I approach this? What do I do with takeout? What can I do with my packaging? Just helping former customers, former clients, and then some new friends as well. Just trying to make it essentially. And so things are starting to creep back to normal here. I'm out east, so I'm in New York, and it's definitely, we're seeing things change a little bit, but it's definitely slow still. Just in terms of people getting back up to speed. I know that we're only at 25% for indoor dining right now. I know a lot of you are already at like 50%, things like that. But it's been a long time coming, getting back sort of inside the space.
Yeah, for sure. Great. So Katie's here today to talk to us and answer like any of our questions about any of our questions we have about setting up our spaces for socially distanced indoor dining. So I know some of us on the call, like Katie was saying, are taking, are taking advantage of the, sorry, I'm just gonna mute. Okay. I know we're taking advantage of the warmer months with like the outdoor patio dining, but like for us in the Northeast, especially, it's not a year-round option. So we want to talk about maximizing the space we have to minimize the risk to our guests. So Katie, I know you have some diagrams to talk through and share, and we had some people on the call who were wonderful enough to also like share some of their floor plans. So we'll be going through some like real life examples. And if you want to take it away.
That sounds perfect. Yeah. So I've got a couple of plans here. What I ended up doing was I've got two plans to show and kind of walk through really quickly. I've got one that's a restaurant space in Chicago, and I'm going to show you guys kind of what it looked like originally and then what it looks like at 25%, or what we've planned for them to be at 25%. And then I actually took one of the ones from Vegas, actually, which I thought was really intriguing just because it's such the polar opposite where, yes, you're in a warmer climate, but it's so warm that you're also always inside. And so that in and of itself leads to different challenges as well. So I ended up grabbing Yardbird in Las Vegas. I don't know if the person who submitted that is here, but it was a really cool floor plan. So I decided to just jump on that one. So I'll go ahead and kind of show you guys those guys and just show some comparisons. But what I really wanted to talk to was, I'm going to kind of walk you guys through the process of sort of like how I think about it when I'm doing it so that you guys can kind of apply those as well, whether it's for actually reestablishing, the interior layout, or if it's for an event as well, you can still take the same sort of thought process and apply it to what you're doing, whether it's a reception or a banquet or anything like that. So let me go ahead and share my screen here a second.
Yeah, we practiced this, so hopefully there are no technical tips.
It should work. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So this is the Chicago plan. This one's unique in that it's a smaller space. I would say it's actually more akin to, some of the ones that we have out here in some of the metropolitan areas in Boston, New York City, things like that. I've got pre-COVID on the right or on the left, and then I've got our 25% capacity over here on the left. So what I'd want to talk through with the one on the left-hand side, and feel free to interrupt me if you have a question or anything like that, like don't hold back. So when you first walked in, it's got street access. So it's got actually a really great sort of outdoor patio. They've been able to do a lot with outdoor dining, so they're in a great position for that. And then one of the interesting architectural details that they have as well is that we actually put in nano walls in this restaurant. So they actually have full indoor-outdoor availability. So what we first did when we first started talking about how to sort of reset this space was we really wanted to identify those sort of key non-movable zones. And those are things like sometimes where your host is, depending on if your host has a built-in area. The bar is obviously non-movable. You're going to have your bartender at the bar. If you've got a kitchen and brewing, ours is all back in this sort of back corner over here. I've cut the plan off so it doesn't show the full thing. Restaurants are also another one, and then serving stations as well. So a lot of those are fixed places that you're going to have people traveling to that you can't physically move. So once we've identified those, typically what we'll do is we start to look at where customers are going to be moving through the space, and then also where employees are going to be moving through the space. So like where servers are going to be going, how the host is going to be taking people to seats. And so a lot of times you can look at sort of what they do normally to kind of establish those original paths of travel. And essentially what you've got here is the bar is pretty well contained. So you don't have anybody behind the bar really moving around too much in the main space. You do, however, have the serving staff coming from the kitchen pass all the way up into the front of house. And then you've got the host entering it sort of perpendicular to seat everyone. Thankfully, there's some pretty clear zones where you've got your dining zone happening right over here. And then you've got your bar seating kind of heading back into the pathway that leads to the kitchen, and then also the restrooms at the end. And then from there, what we want to do is we typically look at sort of where are your, I kind of dub them like your safe zones or your safe seats. These are the ones where, whether it's through architectural components, whether it's through HVAC, air returns, things like that, they're the ones that are the most comfortable seats, are the ones that have the perception of safety around them. One thing I'll talk about in the Las Vegas one is there's some great seats that actually have sort of a small little like partial wall that's sort of protecting the banquettes. Those are really great because they feel sort of protected and they feel like you're kind of contained. Those are really, really great ones to maintain. If you take those and you take your highest turnover tables or your highest profit tables, and use those as your starting points, it's a really great place to say, okay, these are my money makers. These are my perceived safe seats. Keep those as your anchor points, and then get rid of all the rest. So I like to start from a clean slate. So get rid of it, get rid of everything, get rid of all of your additional seating, get rid of any preconceived notions about what the floor plan was supposed to do. You've got your key zones identified, you've got your passive travel identified, and then you've got your sort of your moneymaker and your safe seats identified. So with those, you can now start taking your 6 feet and you can actually start laying out your tables based on those components. Again, trying to minimize any tables located in passive travel, any tables that are going to make a server sort of have to walk around a lot to get to them. Really just trying to make sure that somebody can access the tables really easily. Customers can access the entries and exits really easily. They can get to the bathrooms really easily, and that you're really minimizing the points in when you're going to have server contact sort of with customer contact. Those are really the things that you kind of want to avoid as much as you possibly can. So what you'll notice is over here on the 25% capacity, this one only can get 14 seats in the restaurant. So it's pretty small. What you're seeing here is what we did was we've got this great banquette in the space. Thankfully, we actually built this banquette so that it was removable, so that if we wanted to change the layout in the future, we could do that. If you're building a space, I would highly recommend thinking about flexibility as you're doing that, because this allowed us to actually move this, because this is one of the things I think is cool about this banquette is that this is a really great seat. This is actually a really great, like sort of from a comfort design element perspective. The problem with it though, is that for one, it's not as cleanable. Given how much more we're cleaning tables and we're cleaning seats and we're doing all of that, it's not as cleanable. So think about that. And then the second component was once you take 6 feet into account, and it's 6 feet between people, not 6 feet in between objects. And so we have to make sure that we're accounting for 6 feet with a seat pushed out from a table that actually adds, an extra 2 feet minimum that you're planning for. So we only had room for two seats right there. So all of a sudden, that really nice intimate banquette felt like it was this sort of like lone island where you were like kind of on display. And that doesn't feel good for anybody. So all of a sudden that area went from this amazing sort of experience to this, like, I don't want to sit there. Like I'm in the weird seat. And so that's why we ended up getting rid of that entire banquette and basically just put a 2-top over there. It was a lot easier. It made the space feel a little bit more intimate. So that 2-top now felt more like a moment. You didn't feel as exposed. You were kind of tucked up against the wall, and you weren't worried about the fact that all this open space was out, like kind of next to you, and you're wondering why I'm the only person sitting over here. So I think the interesting thing about like restaurants in general right now is that there's so many specifics to the actual space itself that you have to take into consideration. So just some of those things to start to think through a little bit. But you can see what we did here though was we identified, we've got flexibility in table sizes. So we've got a couple 2-tops, a couple 4-tops. We included our ADA seating still. So that way you're not going to know what party size you're going to have. You're not going to be able to restrict it to, to only 2-tops and only 4-tops. You might have a 6-top come in. You might have an 8-top come in. How do you plan for those things? Ideally, you're also using technology to plan, your reservation so you know what's coming in advance. But, if you don't and you are still accepting walk-ins, what does that look like? So what we did was we capitalized on these 2 sort of nano walls right here are really, really the money-making areas because they can be opened up. They're also the safe seats in this example. There's a lot of airflow right there. They don't feel so exposed. They don't feel so, they feel not exposed. They feel very sort of like protected in a way because of that airflow. They can get out a little bit easier. People can move around them a lot easier. So we tucked 6 of our seats right in that zone right there. And then we added our 2-top along that wall where the banquette was, where you had this sort of partial wall sort of protecting you from this sort of secondary fire exit. And then from there, we added 2 additional ones. And what we did right here with adding these 2 tables, the ADA table and the 2-top sort of near the right of the screen, is the host can get through this in one single move. She can go right through the tables really, really quickly. She doesn't have to go. She's not intersecting anybody. She's not worrying about somebody backing up and like hitting her or going into her path of travel at all, or his. And then the employees also, their zone is really, really contained. They've got their path of travel from the kitchen and the pass. They can stop at the bar and pick up their drinks. They've got their server station really well contained. There's enough room for all of them to spread out as well so that they don't have to be bumping into each other, but they can still remain social, which is a really important thing for employees. And they can come and they can approach almost every single table from the side. It's a detail that you're not gonna be able to get the majority of the time, but it is something to think about because again, they're not coming up behind you. They're not intersecting into sort of those personal bubbles, if you will, as much. They can reach over a little bit more. It feels like they can maintain a little bit more distance. So just something to start to think about as you kind of like think about these spaces and like kind of how they're laying out. But you can see 6 feet of space is a lot of space. And here we were able to get 6 feet pretty easily because the seat count is so much lower. But the moment you take, you know, the back of a seat or somebody standing up or somebody getting into the tables, you got a lot more space in between there. And so it actually ends up a lot further apart than you think it is when you're kind of just like, you know, eyeing it. So I'm going to jump over into the Las Vegas plan as well. So you can kind of just see the counter for interior, larger space, you know, much higher seat count, things like that. Okay, so this is Yardbird interior. So I grabbed this, I actually ended up grabbing this, this floor plan off of the website a little bit just because it showed a lot more detail in terms of the actual seating types, which is really important because a two-top that's exposed is different than, you know, a two-top at a banquette. There's just different architectural parameters and sort of characteristics around those seat types that make it either more unique or yet less unique or more comfortable and less comfortable. So what I was looking at with this one was the main entrance was through the casino. So it's all interior, which is a really interesting perspective. You don't have a lot of airflow. You still have windows, which are great, but you don't have a lot of airflow moving through the space. So HVAC is really important to make sure that that's in check. You've got a couple of like very sort of key movable components. Again, you've got your private dining back here. You've got your bar, which can't be moved. You've got your host station up in the front, which appeared to be pretty stationary. It might be able to move. I'm not 100% sure. And then you've got your back of house, your pass, which is happening sort of right in between here, and then your restrooms. So what I started to look at was sort of, you know, what are the spaces, again, that customers are going to be traveling through, and then what are the areas that employees are going to be traveling through? So obviously you're going to have a lot of employees traveling from your pass out into your restaurant. You're going to have a lot of customers coming in through the main entrance because there really is only one entrance, this is what I can tell. You're going to be having a lot of them come in through there. They're going to be traveling to their seats, to the main dining area, and you're also going to have them traveling back to the bathroom. So how do you kind of control the flow of those customers? So what I was looking at is that the majority of the time, you're going to probably go either you've got two paths of travel. You've got one back along here, kind of just, you know, just north of the bar area and the private dining area. But you've also got another great one in the middle of the sort of the main dining area. My thinking is that in order to reduce the passive travel and the intersection of employees and customers, what I wanted to do is I wanted to define one set path for customers heading to the restrooms, and then another set path that was primarily just for employees. So what you'll see on the next one is two essential zones. So you've got your employee zone, you've got your customer zone. And then what I've essentially done is I've left the underlay of the restaurant underneath here so you can kind of see what it looked like beforehand to see where things were moving around. But you've got these seats right over here that there's a partial wall that I mentioned earlier that acts as a nice little protected zone for these tables over here. So those are really, really great seats. Obviously, I don't know anything about the financials of the restaurant or what seats are great for, you know, what seats are making the most money right now. So you have to take that into account. But based on assumptions, this is kind of what I would do. So you've got in here the availability at 50% capacity, because Vegas obviously went really quickly into 50%. They kind of bypassed the 25% or the ramp up. Is about 65. So 65 is actually really hard to get in here with also making sure that you have a host area. I included some area that's open for people to wait as well, so they weren't waiting in the hallways. You could also have them wait in the hallways if you wanted to. Completely fine option, I would assume, depending on security, things like that. But yeah, so what I'm showing right now is a couple of seats. So we've got a couple of seats over in this main area. You've got four tops over here, again, sort of in these little sort of protected safe seats. And then we've centered the two four tops and then the two top that's up in the top portion of it, like right here. And then what we've done is we've removed a lot of the seats around the banquettes just to open up these spaces. These banquettes are a lot more fixed in their, like the detailing and the architecture of them. And so they're going to be a lot harder to remove. So instead we have to actually work with these guys. These are great though, because they allow a lot of flexibility. So you've got a couple of zones here that they're creating. You've got almost like 4 zones that they're really creating that you can actually work with to sort of ebb and flow the needs or the space needs of the diners coming in. So you've got 4 tops. You could remove one of these. You could have a 2 top sit here if you wanted to. You could move one of these and make a 4 top over here. You're giving yourself enough space. One of the critical things you're gonna have to think about as well is I think that our hosts are actually gonna have to be really, really good. We're putting a lot on them right now, not only from being, you know, like the bouncers, if you will, but the fact that they now have to take into account the fact that, hey, if I sit somebody at, you know, this table down here, all of a sudden this 2 top right here might need to move and I might only be able to sit this top over here. Or if I'm seating 4 people at this high top right here, then this seat can't be used anymore. So all of a sudden this seat is out. And so it's no longer as a fixed plan where you can say, you know, hey, we're just gonna cross off a couple of seats and everything's always gonna be safe, because you still need to have that flexibility, especially as we get into the idea of there's always gonna be reservations being made, but how do you account for people walking in? You're still gonna wanna be able to do that. So that's kind of what I'm showing here. So you can see this as well over by this banquette. I'm showing essentially on this side, there's a 4 top over here that can be moved up and down that banquette as needed to kind of support what's happening in the central zone. And then you can see it in a different perspective over on the other side where it has the two tops and they're not pushed together. So again, 2 different parties versus a single party happening over there. If you needed to, you could take one of those 2 tops and put it over on the other banquette and you could have a 6 top. So again, just a lot of flexibility built into that this sort of main seating zone right here. And you can do this with each of these zones, really. The other thing that I did was the standing height tables that are up near the front that are kind of your barrier from your host to kind of your customer seating zone. I moved those forward a little bit, again, just to give more space. Again, whether that's doable or not is I don't know, but I don't know if they're fixed tables or not. But ideally, you'd move those forward, give them enough space. They do act as a nice barrier to the actual seating zone, so it's kind of a great opportunity to do that. And then we took out the lounge seating and added some 4 tops up against the windows, primarily because these are actually really great safe seats because there's those windows sort of looking out into sort of the main passageway of the casino. While there's not fresh air there, it gives the illusion of fresh air. It gives the illusion of transparency. It gives the illusion of space. And so they actually become really, really great areas for seating. And because you're probably going to want to get rid of a lot of this lounge seating where, you know, a lot of lounge, it's usually soft seating. So again, cleanability you have to think of, but also it promotes the idea of sitting and staying for a lot longer than you probably want now. And so removing a lot of that allows for a lot of flexibility up in this area. You have an area, again, that you could possibly have customers coming in and waiting, but you could also populate this with more chairs if you wanted to as well. So you could get up into there. The other thing that I didn't erase all the way down here was the bar. The bars are really difficult in that it's really hard to maintain 6 feet from the bartender to somebody sitting at the bar. It's just a really hard distance to maintain. Granted, you're going to have those zones sort of come into play, or those distances break when you have servers serve tables anyway. So it's kind of on the establishment to decide if they're comfortable with that sort of contact and what that looks like. But you can actually put a couple of seats. I put a couple of seats over here by the bar. It is apart, which is great. It's kind of down towards the end, so you're not gonna have to worry about people coming behind you and crossing behind you. It would primarily be most likely one group of people, not multiple groups of people sitting there. But it is a great way to add on and get additional seat counts if you're starting to get low on the seat counts in here and you wanna get closer to that actual max occupancy. So those are essentially 2 sort of really good examples of kind of like how you can think through the space types. But really it comes down to just sort of establishing within your space, you know, like what are those non-movable zones? Where are the paths of travel? Where are sort of the safe or the money-making seats? And then really just trying to get up to your max occupancy, but remember that your max occupancy is a suggestion and you have to maintain the distances primarily over the occupancy count. And so really making sure to plan for the distance versus the actual, the distance with people versus the distance with objects.
So we do have a question in the chat from Jeannie. How are the movable zones identified for staff guests or staff and guests?
What do you mean?
Janie, if you want to type in.
Well, I can talk.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. I'm just wondering how you are clarifying to the staff or the guests that this is your area. I mean, the staff is going to know more, but for guests, how do they know not to go into the employee area? Are there arrows on the ground, or what's the way to identify that for people?
Yeah, that's actually, sorry, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been doing a lot is a lot of plants. So plants are a really low cost sort of barrier option that you can use to move around as well, which is phenomenal. They also help with air quality. They also, you know, add a little bit of privacy. So they're just a really good workhorse right now during COVID. So like with this plan right here, what I would do is I would actually be placing some sort of barrier down here just south of this customer zone, like right here, basically just to establish that anybody sitting in this zone is going to naturally move north on the plan up towards that customer path. So they're moving through the space kind of how you want them to. You can do it with arrows on the floor if you want as well, but there's also some really great sort of non-visual cues that you can use, like plants and things like that, and some, you know, more built barriers that can say the same thing without having to put, you know, follow these arrows on the floor. I mean, I think it's interesting. They work to an extent. I find a lot of places they're doing a lot of signage on the floor and a lot of wayfinding, and people just don't look down that much. They're concerned with, what am I going to run into right now? They're concerned with running into people right now, and so their eyes are up. They're not really looking down. Add that to the masks, and it actually reduces your sight lines a lot. And so it's actually really hard to look down and actually see those wayfinding things unless they're a good distance in front of you. So just something to think through as you're thinking through those options, but really either one is a great option.
That's true. Every time I'm in the grocery store, I get yelled at because you know how they have like maybe like one aisle go up, go down.
Yep.
Like,
yeah.
Ugh.
Nobody can follow those.
Yeah.
So.
So hard. Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to type them in or just shout them out. I've also muted a lot of you, so you'll have to unmute yourself too if you're wondering why you're not hearing your voice. Well, I have a question if nobody else wants to jump in. So, like, what are some common areas of error that you've seen restaurants making when trying to like rearrange their spaces to accommodate COVID and tend not to be fixed right away?
Yeah, honestly, the biggest one, and I touched on this earlier, is the spacing between people versus the spacing between things. I think that a lot of times when we're actually doing our layouts, especially when we're doing them sort of like in real life in the space, you're moving tables around. You're not moving people around necessarily. And so you're taking, you know, we've been taking, you know, the tape measures or whatnot and actually making sure there's 6 feet in between. But then the moment somebody goes and sits in that table, all of a sudden there's now, you know, you're down to maybe 4 feet in between. Obviously, I know that COVID, I don't think actually knows the difference between 5'9" versus, you know, 6 feet versus 6'2", but
either Miss Fenwick or you.
Sorry, I can just mute that person.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, but that's honestly the biggest one that I've been seeing is that desire to get as close as possible to that max occupancy seat count for, you know, 25 or 50% is pushed so much that you end up seeing things a lot closer than they should be. And then as people move around, tables move, obviously chairs move, things like that. And a lot of those well-laid plans become mute anyways. Mm-hmm. And so the biggest thing that I would say is if you can plan for it ahead of time, plan for the extra space. It's just more comfortable. And then a lot of times what we've been talking about with restaurants is, you know, diversifying their revenue streams as well. So it's not just about indoor dining now. It's you're still also having that increased to-go orders. You're still having the delivery option still a big play right now. And so, you know, think about all the different revenue streams that you've got going on and make sure that you're not just trying to populate the restaurant with, you know, I can have 65 seats per, you know, for COVID restrictions, but maybe I can only fit 58 in there, you know, you might not. So just making sure to be safe, because it's better to be safe up front than to end up having something go wrong and then having to close down again. You know, I mean, I think that's worst case scenario.
For sure. And then we had another question from Barry. What tools do you like to use to help like plan these floor plan layouts?
So I typically use AutoCAD or Revit to do these. And then typically what we're looking at is the biggest thing though is that it's in conjunction with, typically it's with either an owner, or if ideally possible, we also have restaurant staff join. So ideally like one server, the host, and maybe somebody from the kitchen, just because they all have different perspectives on how they move through the space. And if you haven't done a really great audit of how everybody moves through the space, it's great to get their perspectives, because a lot of times there's certain areas that servers don't like to walk through, or there's pain points already in the floor plan. And you can actually accommodate those really well when you're actually planning these things out and paying attention to, you know, these non-movable zones, your path of travels, and then your actual sort of customer zones.
Yeah.
Hi, Katie. So I know you said that you're in New York City. Do you have any specific ideas for how, we know that for New York City, obviously outdoor dining has been a big piece of this because indoor dining has been restricted. Do you have any specific suggestions about how people can make an outdoor space seem Instagrammable or like interesting, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that question actually. Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about that a lot. I mean, there's no guarantee that, you know, in New York City that we're going to be able to maintain indoor dining. You know, we're just opening it back up now. I think it opened up last week, and it could go away any second. And so, as you know, we're going to be dealing with snow and rain and, you know, chilly forecasts. It's there's a lot of conversations about alternative formats, which is what I absolutely adore. So we've talked about, you know, there's everything from off the shelf, like greenhouses. Those are really, really great. You can go on Wayfair and get amazing greenhouses. You can do the igloos. The igloos are always popular, you know, especially on rooftops for experiences, but those are really great if you have the patio space or the street space now. We don't know what's going to happen, obviously, with the increased street space that we've been sort of given in a lot of municipalities moving into the winter. Hopefully they'll maintain it if indoor dining is, you know, still super reduced and or not available. But the ideal thing is really to think about it as an experience. Think about what you have to offer that's really unique to you. Like what's your why? Why did you start it? What was the thing that people keep coming back to you for? What is the component that really sort of gets people excited about your space, or what can you offer that would get people really excited about it? You know, one of the things that I talked about that is one of my favorite examples from a spot around here was they decided to go really big on this is for summer obviously, but they're like their tiki cocktails. And they did an entire sort of like tropical pirate themed patio, basically. They did put a little bit of money and they got some really cool like flamingo cups that you could actually walk around with. But again, it was a branding move. So you actually knew who those people, where they were coming from when you were walking down the street and you saw them with their flamingo cups. And it was a really, really great moment. It also encouraged people to sort of start sharing things again. They were sharing that they were going to this restaurant, so then people knew that they were open again. They were sharing that they had this really cool offer, so then people were going there just to get pictures with the flamingo cups. And so it was a really good way to sort of engage people again. And then you're also tacking on all of the food sales with that. And so it was a really, really great sort of driver for people coming into your space, your outdoor space.
Definitely. We had a question, and I know we're kind of just touching on like indoor dining, but do you have any insight on how mid-sized groups for private dining can be handled? I know me and you kind of talked about it a little bit, like it all kind of depends.
Yeah, these ones are really hard. Like specific event spaces, I think are a lot easier because a lot of times it's bigger events. You have a full area, you have a capacity that you can maintain. And from there, it's just making sure again that you're planning for distance from people and not distance from objects. And it's pretty easy. You know, you have your 8 tops, your 10 tops, etc. For smaller groups, I think that the biggest thing is, again, these ones are really tough. I would really be driving a lot of the bigger groups onto actual reservations. And I'm not sure exactly what platform you'd be using to actually do this, but communicate that reservations are required, at least for the little bit. It allows you to maintain a little bit of control over sort of who's coming in when, so that you're not getting bombarded with, you know, a 6 or an 8 top or a 12 top or something like that. in the middle of, a standard dining experience. So you're not having to try to figure out, how do I make space for these people? How long do they wait so you have the room to actually accommodate the size of a group? Are they pushing other people out? It's really the easiest way to be able to do that. So when they're coming, how much space you have, that you can control sort of everybody else around there as well. And typically, if you're communicating it well enough that this is the reason and this is why you're doing this, to maintain their safety, to maintain, to keep them safe, to make sure that they're not having to wait a ton of time. Usually people are pretty receptive about that and they're a little bit more willing to do it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's such a tricky situation in that, people are walking up and it's, if it's a mid-sized group and that it's, 10, 12 people or something like that. I mean, I like to believe that people have a little bit of common sense that it's like, we're not gonna be able to just seat you anywhere. It's probably not true, but yeah.
And then are there like small things that restaurants can do if they don't have like the funds to hire an expert or somebody like you to help them?
Oh yeah, definitely. So the biggest thing, honestly, that I always tell people, whether like, we're helping them or not, is to, take a moment, even if it's having like one of your friends or family sit in the space on one of the nights that you're actually working, especially now with the new parameters, and actually document sort of where people are moving. So document all the servers, document where they're most traveling, document where most of the people are going. What are they doing? What are they looking for? What are the comments that you're getting the most? Make sure that you're actually sort of like keeping track of all of that, because it actually makes it really easy to sort of plan around those things then. It actually makes you able to accommodate and react really quickly. It also helps you with your planning as well, because one of the biggest things that we ask when we first talk with somebody is deep diving into sort of where everybody's moving through the space. You've got to understand how the space functions as well, to understand how you can then react and move things around to make sure that everything still makes sense and you're not creating, you're not causing chaos with, people bumping into other servers, food coming out, things like that.
And then if you had an opportunity to build a new venue, like what are some ways to make the space work for social distancing, but in a not obvious way for when not needed? So I know you had mentioned like the removable walls. Is there anything else like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is flexibility, like build flexibility into it at all times. If you can get your banquettes, on casters, things like that, like you can do it with skirting that you won't even notice that they're there typically. There's ways to detail things out that are really, really easy, that you can still have things feel very sort of like built in and purposeful, even though they're actually still movable. I would also pay attention to cleaning components as well and the operation side of things. A lot of times what we see is they're handled very separately, where you have a team working on operations and then you have a team working on design and architecture, and those two teams don't team up. And the interior space as you're building out is not just about how it looks, especially when you're talking to like design and architecture. It's also about how it functions and how it makes people feel. And a lot of those emotions that are tied to dining are tied to that sort of that happy marriage of function and operations with design aesthetics, whether that, and that's, that's all senses as well with those design experiences and design elements. So I would make sure as you're going through and you're planning out a new space, make sure that you have all parties involved from the get-go. Make sure you have, the chef on board if you already have that person, or at least somebody that knows the food end of things. Make sure that you have, somebody with host experience, with server experience, with busing experience as well. Again, that's operations, but how are they getting in and out of the space? How are they dealing with, bus tubs and stuff like that? Or are they dealing with bus tubs? Are there server stations? All of those things have to be so closely intertwined to really, really make an impactful experience for a guest. And then I would also say that, when you make that impactful experience for a guest, you're also making it super easy for all of your staff too. And that's ultimately, if it's easier for the staff, they can make more money, they're happier, and they're going to stick with you longer. So.
Definitely. And then we just had another question. Do you have any tips, tricks to making your distance seating look less empty, spaced out, make it feel a little bit more intimate? Like, it's so crazy that 25% of a 56 seat restaurant is like 14 people.
Yeah, it's really sad actually. Right. Yeah, I mean, that's why I think it's really important to establish like those zones. So you are making sure that at least the 14 seats that you can have are all sort of in the same area. So you still have visual sight lines to people, so you can still see people. That's really, really important. And then again, I know I mentioned earlier, but go big on plants right now. They work wonders for your space. You can do groupings of them. You can do cool installations. You can put them on a really cool table, and all of a sudden you have this amazing sort of moment in the middle of your space that takes up visual space and also allows you to have everybody spread out. And you don't notice that there's this huge void in the middle of the dining room. You can, we've done a lot of sort of built, like not necessarily stanchions, but kind of stanchions where you're building sort of barriers, if you will. Again, you can make them essentially like planters or things like that, or displays. There's nothing saying that you can't add design elements or like tchotchkes back into your space right now, as long as you can, clean them pretty easily. But you can do moments like that in the middle of seating groups that make it feel like it's just a design moment, if you will, even though it's actually there to take up space and then remind you that there used to be tables in the middle of that, but now there's this really cool installation in the middle.
How do you feel about all of the creative ways people were like doing distancing with like mannequins and like blow up dolls and all of those cardboard cutouts?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is that it's like, people are getting really creative, which is actually really cool for our industry. I feel like it's going to be a shift. We're going to think about I know that we're going to think about how we lay out restaurants and how we design restaurants in a completely different way, because we have now, back in the day you added ADA in, and that made you think about how you laid out restaurants in a completely different way. And now it's second nature to us. We just include that in there. And I think that this is going to be another one of those things where it's like, we're just going to think about COVID as a requirement for flexibility, for cleanliness, for operations, for, how do you flex your space if you need to go to a different operating model? So it's like people are doing crazy stuff right now, but some of it's going to stick, and if you don't, you might as well try it. Right now, we've got the opportunity where people are at least being semi-open to new experiences and to things not necessarily working 100% perfectly. They kind of are a little bit more attuned to it. And so you might as well throw it out there,
Right. It's like a good time to experiment and see what.
It's great. I feel like we're like kind of in like beta mode where it's, might as well try it.
Right. Does anybody else on the call have any questions? Feel free to type them in. Or if you have like a weird space thing in your restaurant or venue that you want to ask about.
I was just going to ask, sorry, Azure.
I had a quick question because I'm in New York too, and they just announced 25% capacity dining. This is kind of like a selfish personal question, but Katie, you or some of our customers out there, do you recommend that restaurants push reservations because now you've got fewer seats and you want to fill them, and maybe talk about it as an exclusive kind of thing so that you're able to get the people in and people are, able to get a seat at your restaurant? Like, are they pushing the customers to plan ahead when they do come in and dine indoors?
I know that I'm pushing it. Whenever we're talking to a restaurant, I'm saying yes. It'll just allows you, there's so much that you can't control right now in the situation. And this allows you even a tiny little bit more control about knowing what's going on. It just helps. Again, it helps that host. The host is the front line right now. Like, I feel so sorry for every single host currently. And so it helps them plan. It helps them understand who's coming. It understands how much time they have to clean. You can plan cleaning in between turnovers, which is great. You don't have people getting hangry and upset because they're waiting for a table because they decided to walk up and you only have 14 seats. What are you going to do? And so I think it just takes a lot of the conversations or the points of contention that can sometimes come up in a dining experience out of the equation a little bit. And again, as long as the restaurants are, really communicating and making sure that all of their social media channels and all their website, everything is all coordinated, so everything is saying the same thing, I don't think it's that much to ask. A lot of places right now are, really pushing hard on just making sure that everybody knows like the rules to dining now. And so this can be one of those newly established, like we require you to have a reservation. Most places are doing it now. It's not that uncommon. It's not that crazy of a thought anymore. And then the places that are really gung ho on having walk-ups still be available. I know that, it's getting busier in the city again. It's interesting to see, and people are walking around again and they are looking for, just like, I want to bop into someplace and grab something. having a zone for that as well. If you are really gung-ho on having a spot for walk-ups, that's another opportunity as well, where you could have an area that's just for walk-ups. And, and as long as it's communicated that, hey, we only have 4, 5, 6 seats in that area, this is what it is. It's people are there. It's going to take, an hour and a half, because we have to make sure that we clean it after those people are gone. You've got a group of 3 and we don't have the space for it right now. As long as you're overly communicating on those things, I think it's okay. But I am constantly pushing towards adopt a reservation system. Like, if you don't already have one, adopt one.
Great. I think Lita had a question.
I was just going to touch, I know it's so intertwined, but because events is a lot of our focus here and our customers' focus, and I think this almost in a weird way ends up benefiting events because it's predictable, controlled numbers coming in, and using maybe the greater space of the restaurant that you typically don't have access to. Like, it all becomes kind of a private dining room. But I was wondering if you're seeing or hearing from customers ways that they're seeing and adapting. I mean, I think on the flip side, the anybody that does have private dining space is being converted into a la carte dining because it's so. But I didn't know if you were hearing or seeing any trends for that, specifically with like using the spaces for events, and the capacity still apply? Is it just total? Do you know if it's total capacity? So if it's 100 people, you have 25%. I know in New York specifically, it's different by state, but does that mean if it's one private event, they don't necessarily have to be socially distant if they come in as a group, right?
Yeah. And that's to my understanding. It's a little different from what I'm hearing. It's a little bit different everywhere because there's not sort of set there's not as detailed of criteria as I think that we honestly need. Because it's 25 or 50% of occupancy, but occupancy also includes all the staff that's working there as well. And so that's also something
misleading.
Yeah. Forget to take into account too. And so, yeah, I actually think that events are a really great option right now. Like, if you can do private events and you can, make that money like that way, you're in a really great space, especially if you have space for private events you already have within your restaurant. I mean, that's phenomenal because, again, like you're saying, it's controlled. You know how many people are coming in, when they're coming in, approximately how much they're going to eat. You can control a lot of the customer flow really, really easily that way. One of the things that I've seen done a lot recently, if you do have either a smaller private, a lot of them have a little bit smaller private space that initially was converted over into their to-go area typically, is they're bringing that back on as event space, but they're doing a lot more private events during the week. So a lot of times when they're not as busy, they're using that to push private events happening, Thursdays now, as opposed to Fridays, Saturdays. So they're still getting the majority of people in the restaurant on a Friday and Saturday for major dining, and they're using that private event space as additional tables, an additional seat count if they can. One of the things I would say is to just make sure that you're paying attention to, I would pay attention to the cost, to be honest, and to the revenue that you're bringing in. Because one thing that's happening is you could be bringing in, a Friday night, for example, you're converting over the entire restaurant, including private dining area for just seating. And so you're using that to, get 2 to 4 more 4 tops in or whatever. And that could be bringing in less than you could make with one event space. And so you now have to balance hey, maybe I could actually get 2 events per weekend at 50 people that don't have to be as socially distant, that can be closer because they're they know each other, they're expecting it already, and I can then make more money.
Well, it was always that numbers game, but now it's converse, right? It's like the events actually in the driver's seat a little bit more than they once were because it was always battling that Friday, Saturday night revenue. And now the likelihood with reduced capacity is that the event it's likely to get more predictable income, right?
Well, and now the cool thing now is that you also have that a little bit of exclusivity where it's like, if you can afford to go out for an event and you can afford to do one of these, a little bit more personal sort of seating groups, you now have the ability to sort of capitalize on that as almost an exclusive thing where the exclusivity of it, a lot of more people are willing to buy into that because it's safer, it feels safer. And you get either the whole restaurant to yourself, you get the chef to yourself, all of a sudden it feels like something that you weren't able to get beforehand. One of the really great examples, Girl and the Goat in Chicago is doing it on their, I think it's a rooftop that they actually have, where they're doing it, and Stephanie Iser, the head chef, is the one actually serving. And so, it's only for, I think, 8 to 10 people or something like that. But, that's an experience now that you get that level of, celebrity chef to cook for you in this environment. I mean, you can actually probably charge more for it as well. So.
Well, and I think that's something we sat in on a bunch of Triple Seat as a team. We sat on a bunch of Fab talks, the Fab conference, and we learned that they really drove home that people are willing to pay a premium for safety more than anything. They're willing to pay a little bit more for safety, and I think we've talked about that before in our social hours, as well as the exclusivity of something, and even getting that. In the I know we're talking about in-house, but catering as well. When you feel like you're getting something special, you will pay more. So
you will, yeah,
definitely. Anybody else have any questions? No, I was gonna say, Katie, I thought it was so funny as I was listening to you talk, you saying like, these are going to be your safest seats. Like, I'm just imagining, how like in movies, somebody comes in and they're like, give me your finest table. Now it's going to be like, give me your safest table. It's like your premium table.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's completely changed. It's a weird world we're living in, but.
Okay. Well,
I'm fond of saying, imagine us a year ago,
right,
ever predicting that this is what we would be talking about or how we'd be, last September, we're gearing up for I don't know what, but not this. So it's all just flipped on its back.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I love seeing photos. I have photos come up in like my photo stream of this time like last year, or this time 2 years ago, and it's like large gatherings and hugging people, and you're just like, it feels way more than a year ago.
Well, and don't you have that moment when you watch movies where you're like, they're too close. What are they doing? Back up.
Yes.
It makes me.
We're going to have that in dining rooms. We're going to have that kind of like, why are the seats so close together? What are they doing? They're shaking hands. Get away. Stop.
Mm-hmm. That's like the most scandalous. Like, they're touching. Like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
Did they just meet? We had a question from Michael. Do you have any other recommendations for table layout design besides Autocad? I know somebody else in the chat had said Social Tables also has like a social distancing.
And all seated.
All seated. That was it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And social tables. Yeah, they both.
But, yeah, and obviously I'm approaching this from like an architectural and design perspective. You can also use SketchUp as well. You'd have to, input an actual floor plan still and like kind of build it a little bit, but it's pretty easy to learn the free version of it. It's a little bit rudimentary, but it's a good option as well.
Awesome. All right. And so if anybody else, or if nobody else has any questions, I'm sure. Oh, SketchUp. Oh, you just put that in there too.
Yeah.
If no one else has any questions, I think we can kind of start to wrap it up. I'm going to share a link in the chat for everyone. If you guys would, this is a link to our survey. It gives me something to look forward to see what you all think about social hours and to hear your thoughts and to get ideas for upcoming social hours. So it helps me and it helps us a lot, help you guys. So feel free to fill it out. Let us know what you liked. And just some more resources we have that we can share with everyone. We have a Facebook group. Anyone can join. It's for event managers and event sales managers. We post articles in there. We post upcoming social hours. It's a great place to kind of like talk shop with other people in your industry. And as always, we love a good podcast plug. So if you guys haven't yet, check out our 2 Chicks, 3 Seats podcast. Azure, can you share the link to the Facebook group and to the podcast for everybody? But Rachel and Kate are your hosts on the podcast, so you don't have to listen to me talk on them and these social hours. So I promise it's different voices, which is always good.
And Caitlin, if that link didn't work for the survey, we'll make sure to get it out to you somehow.
Oh yeah, here's why it didn't work. I have it. We also send these all out in the post social hour email for everybody. So Katie, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And I know you said we can kind of send out the floor plans to everybody as well. So we'll send you guys all of that stuff too. Appreciate you joining and all of your insights. And we'll be sure to include Katie's information in our email too, so that you guys can reach out to her and ask
Yeah,
for-
and one thing to add too is I sent over the tips and tricks, sort of like a checklist that you can follow for if you are laying out the space. So I'll send that over to you as well that you can include.
Perfect. Yeah. So we'll have a lot of great resources for everybody in the post email. So look out for that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.